When you picture the American Wild West, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably the classic Hollywood cliches, right? Dusty towns, saloons, maybe a solitary outlaw riding off into the sunset. But in this explainer, we're going to look at the real history of how the West was settled. And honestly, it's through a completely different and way more fascinating lens. We're going to see how the traditional nuclear family acted as the literal engine of American continental expansion.
So let's just go ahead and bust that myth of the lone cowboy right out of the gate. You see it in movies all the time, the solitary rider braving the elements to bring law to the lawless frontier. But the actual weapon of American expansion, it was the family unit. It wasn't some lone gunslinger who settled the territories, carved out communities, and established a new constitutional order. It was husbands, wives, and children. They were out there working, surviving, and building the country together.
Okay, to really understand this, we'll trace the family's journey across three distinct dimensions today: the economic, the moral, and the political. We've got 6 key steps to cover, from frontier building blocks all the way to expanding rights back east. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. Families, the frontier building blocks.
Think of early America as a massive empty grid. Well, actually scratch that. It wasn't empty, but to the government back east, it lacked American political structure and order. To fix that, the family acted as a kind of cellular building block. To solve really basic problems of power and authority over such a massive area, the government completely relied on these family cells to extend its political dominion. Just like cells make up a living, breathing body, these families made up the new society. They formed this absolutely vital intermediary institution between the lone, vulnerable individual and a very distant central government.
And out there, it was wild. The untamed wilderness was full of elk, bear, and bison. It was a harsh, unforgiving environment that required intense cooperation just to stay alive. A solitary explorer could map the territory, sure, but it took organized families to actually transform that rugged landscape into thriving communities and functioning states.
To put this into perspective, get this. An 1809 squatter census in Madison County counted exactly 2,223 people. That's a huge deal because it proves that settlers were coming out west as entire families, men, women, and loads of children. They were building homes, clearing trees, and planting corn. These weren't just rowdy frontiersmen looking to strike it rich overnight. These agrarian families functioned as the primary economic units for Western settlement.
Moving on to Section 2, agrarian versus market visions.
So back east, national policy was basically caught in a massive tug-of-war. On one side, you have Thomas Jefferson. He's envisioning this independent agrarian family, a very local, self-sufficient republic rooted in the soil. On the flip side, you've got Alexander Hamilton pushing a centralized, market-based model driven by commerce and capital. Westward migration was really just a journey of families attempting to realize that Jeffersonian dream. They were literally building a new constitutional order with their own 2 hands.
Because of this, the agrarian household became the undisputed economic engine of the West. It was the absolute smallest unit capable of actual material self-sufficiency. Because it was rooted entirely in family labor, the household naturally resisted those centralist tendencies of Hamilton's system. They weren't just farming out there, they were living out a specific political economy based on fierce independence and local control.
Which brings us to Section 3, women as moral guardians.
Now, back in Eastern culture, there was this very strong belief in separate spheres for men and women, governed by something called the cult of true womanhood. Under this ideology, a woman's crucial role was to be the ultimate moral guardian and the primary educator of her children. Her domestic duties weren't just about keeping a tidy house. They were seen as absolutely essential for preserving the morals of the entire society. She was basically viewed as a domestic saint. This idea was so deeply ingrained that the U.S. Supreme Court later described this dynamic as the first step from barbarism to incipient civilization. Society and the government viewed these women as the primary tool for civilizing the raw, wild frontier. By educating their children practically and morally, women were the anchors that kept these brand new communities from completely descending into chaos.
Okay, let's look at the legal side in Section 4, defining the constitutional family.
This whole expansion brought up a huge legal debate at the time. Is marriage just a private contract between 2 people, or is it a public creation deeply tied to the state? The Supreme Court actually had to step in and answer this, formally defining how this cellular building block of society should be legally structured. And they did this through a series of landmark anti-polygamy cases late in the century. You have Reynolds in 1878, Maynard in 1888, and Davis in 1890. Through these rulings, the court used family policy to define legal marriage. They legally mandated the monogamous, nuclear family as a vital constitutional institution. The court explicitly stated that this specific family structure was absolutely necessary to prevent what they called stationary despotism. It was a fundamental pillar required for the American Republic to even function.
Next up, Section 5, Evolving Roles on the Range.
Now here's where things get really interesting. Eastern expectations tried to confine women strictly to cooking, cleaning, and moral education. But Western realities, they demanded so much more. The environment was brutally harsh and formal law was incredibly weak. So purely out of survival necessity, women were forced to drastically expand their economic and social roles. The frontier simply did not allow for the luxury of strictly separated gender spheres.
To survive, women took on grueling, incredibly unconventional tasks. We're talking about pitching tents, yoking up cattle, hunting, carrying guns, and even collecting buffalo chips for fuel. By managing entire homesteads, they formed a true mutual partnership with their husbands. They became indispensable economic co-laborers, which completely defied that Eastern model of the domesticated, subservient wife.
And that perfectly sets up Section 6, Expanding Rights Back East.
You see, the pipeline from the prairie to the ballot box was remarkably clear. Because women were now vital economic co-laborers on the farm, it naturally led them to step outside the home and join agricultural associations, groups like the Grange and the Farmers Alliance. These organizations eagerly welcomed women because they obviously had a direct economic stake in farm reform. From there, it was a very logical step for those associations to eventually start championing a woman's right to vote.
And the results? Totally staggering. By 1914, 10 Western states had granted women the right to vote. Compare that to the East, where only one state had done the same. The expanded roles and fierce independence of Western women successfully echoed all the way back east, fundamentally transforming the social and political status of women nationwide.
So, as we wrap up and think about how the 19th century family conquered the West and transformed our legal rights, it really makes you wonder, how are our modern, evolving family structures rewriting the rules of tomorrow? If the traditional family was the primary building block that expanded the nation back then, what kind of constitutional order are our families building right now? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.